Hello and welcome to the show. Today we have an appointment with Mr. Sumant Sinha, who is the Chairman and CEO of ReNew Power. Very good to have you on the show, Mr. Sinha. Of course, it's been a long journey for you. I have known you as an investment banker, then CFO of some big companies, and now you are the owner of a power company. Which one has been most exciting for you?
Well, they've all had their own areas of interest, for the time that I was doing them. But I think clearly by far the most satisfying and rewarding has been my current stint at ReNew Power, because it's something that I started and I've seen it grow now to this point, and that's really been a very rewarding exercise.
All right, so you have some big announcement to make. That is now 1 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity that your company has managed to get. What are the target levels going forward, and how big are you on renewable energy when it comes to India? Of course, government has been putting a lot of weight on this particular space as well.
Yeah, I think the good news is that the government has set a very ambitious target for the sector. And that target is, is 160 gigawatts to be achieved by 2022 from the current number of 35 gigawatts. Which means we have to add about 125 gigawatts in the next 6 years, which is about 20 gigawatts every year, from a current base level of maybe around 3 or 4 gigawatts, right? So we have to really up our game by almost 6 or 7 times of where we are right now. And that is really what makes this sector such an exciting sector to be in, because the government is solidly behind it. Costs have come down to a point where both wind and solar are pretty competitive now with the conventional side. And therefore, there is no real constraint to growth. The only real constraint is the ability for us to execute.
Right.
And therefore, we need to build our capability as rapidly as possible.
So what is your target for next 5 years?
So, Nisha, if I look at our capacity add so far, we have, since we started off, maintained a market share of about 10% of all new capacity in wind. And in solar also, if you look at all the allocations that have happened so far since we started over the last 3 years, we've pretty much been able to maintain a 10% market share in that as well. So our desire really would be that over the next 6 or 7 years, we maintain the market share that we're at right now, which is about a tenth of the market. And if we can do that, and if the government does succeed in adding 120 gigawatts of new capacity, then you can do the maths. The opportunity space is very large. And so that is really what we would like to try to achieve.
So where will you get the money to really grow, Mr. Sinha? Is IPO really on the horizon? Because many of the power producers, especially solar power producers, have been looking at IPO street as well.
No, look, you're absolutely right. This is a very capital-intensive sector. The good news is that for every 5 megawatts you set up, that allows you to do 1 more megawatt every year, right? So as you keep adding more capacity, you have more cash flow to keep funneling and fueling more capacity add. Now, if you look at us right now, we've raised close to 4,000 crores of equity from variety of equity investors, which are really marquee names and have been willing to back us up to support our growth so far. So going forward, there are multiple ways for us to raise more equity capital. Our existing investors can give us more capital. We can raise it from new investors. Or at some point, perhaps we can look at the public markets as well.
But you won't like to dilute your own equity. You're already on a minority.
No, I think that, one has to be pragmatic about it. The idea is to build a large company, to build a really good company. And as long as the pie keeps growing, I think one should not be fussed so much about the percentage that one has. One should be really focused on the absolute value creation. And as I said, the exciting thing really is to build a large, good, sustainable company that operates in a really good space. I think that is really where the reward comes from.
All right. So you're really not answering the IPO question. Is that on the horizon, at least in the next year or so?
I would say that we'll definitely consider it very seriously. I think that our board, certainly we've had discussions. And as we look at our fundraising plans, we have sufficient equity right now to fund our entire pipeline of 2.4 gigawatts as well, which we'll probably construct by the beginning of next year sometime. So certainly after that, we'll need to raise more capital. Now, whether that comes from a private source or a public source is something that we'll take a decision on in the next few months' time. But certainly that's an area that we are discussing fairly extensively right now.
Looking at the sector on the whole, do you think that budget has done enough for the sector to give that added impetus? And how are investors now looking at it?
I think one has to look at the totality of what the government is doing. And I think what they've done so far for the sector is quite incredible. And I'm a realist at heart, so I don't use large words or words like this without it actually happening. So if you look at what the government has done, the target for the National Solar Mission was 20,000 megawatts by 2022. I think this government has upped that target for solar by 5 times, right? And not only have they changed the target, but they're also working very actively to achieve those targets. And if you look at the fact that since October, November of last year, they've already auctioned off about 5 gigawatts of total solar capacity. And there's another 5 gigawatts that is on the table to get auctioned, which means that they would have reached that 20 gigawatt target literally by 2017 in terms of actual commission capacity. Right? So they're on pace at a gigawatt of new auctions every month to help us get to that target. And then there is the whole rooftop space, which is another exciting area for which there's a fairly extensive target as well, which will also hopefully add to this new capacity addition. So I'm fairly hopeful, therefore, that this target will be met. So the government is not just coming out of the target, is also doing whatever they can do to implement it. Now, in the budget, the one important thing that the government did is that they increased the cess on coal from 200 rupees a ton to 400 rupees a ton. Now, that means that they'll collect close to 25 to 30,000 crores every year to fund now clean environment projects.
Of course.
Right? Not just energy, but environment.
So that makes you more competitive now.
It does. So they have actually a lot of money that is coming in to support the sector in a variety of different ways. Right? And so all of that money, or at least half of that money, if it comes into the sector, can go a long way in actually helping us add this capacity. So yes, the budget did have this one very important provision, which I think is very fundamental to the funding side of the whole equation.
Right. You spoke about the auction process. Now tell me, there have been various reports on how aggressive the auction process has been. Will it be now feasible to make enough margins with this kind of aggression seen in auction process?
No, I think, look, that's a great question. This is something that we debate in the industry at all points in time. We debate with the government as well. See, the government has set upon the path of going after auctions because they believe that is the most transparent and fair way of allocating capacity, and that's a policy decision that they've taken, right? So there's no getting around that at this point in time. So the ball really comes to the court of the industry. Now, in the industry, of course, there are multiple players. Now, unfortunately, some of the players have chosen to be super aggressive. And in doing so, they have bid numbers that really don't give you any compensation for the risk that you're taking. And there are multiple risks. There are risks around execution, there are risks around FX, there are risks about interest rates, there are risks in the future about equipment performance, about evacuation problems and so on, receivables problems. So those risks at these tariffs are not getting compensated to the developers. And so therefore I think there has to be some way for tariffs to either stabilize while capital costs go down. That will then create a little bit of buffer for the margins. So I think something like that needs to happen, or tariffs need to go up by a little bit. And I'm not talking here about 50 paise or 75 paise a unit. I'm talking about 15, 20 paise a unit. I think even if that happens, there will be sufficient compensation for developers for doing a lot of the work they're doing and for taking the risks that they're taking. And keep in mind, what is very critical in this sector is that if you want to hit another 125,000 megawatts of capacity in renewables and wind and solar, we need close to $130 to $140 billion of new capital to come in, which means we need at least $30 or $40 billion of equity capital. And that equity capital will only come to the sector if there are attractive returns to be made.
Of course.
Otherwise, that capital has many other possible homes.
So are you saying that profitability could be a risky factor at this point, especially with the aggressive bid process? Because we've seen the same thing in the conventional sources of energy.
I know, and that's a real worry. I think that if you look at the bids that have happened in the last few months, some of those bids certainly have been too aggressive, and we have to now see whether those projects get built, whether the people who have funded those projects make any kind of returns or not. And I should also tell you that there are a lot of assets that are now at this point available for sale in the secondary market. So a lot of the people who bid these assets to begin with are now turning around with a view to selling them or getting equity participation in them. And there are separately entire portfolios of solar assets as well available for sale. So the amount of supply of projects in the secondary market is really increasing at a rapid pace. And that's not good for the primary market.
But are you taking advantage of that?
We would like to. We would like to, provided that the sellers have rational expectations about what kind of value to get. So I think once that rationalization comes in, and that realism comes in, I think then you'll probably start seeing a lot more deals happening. So today, what we are struggling for is to find proper long-term capital to come into the sector. The reason you're seeing so many assets for sale is because we don't have adequate amounts of long-term capital in the sector, right? Dedicated capital. And that is my concern, that if you don't give proper returns, you will not have that capital coming in. And if you don't have it coming in, these targets will not get fulfilled. Now, the government's counterpoint to that, which is partly valid, is that, look, if we have more supply of projects and less providers of doing projects, then automatically tariffs will go up. And that is something that we have to see. We've certainly seen tariffs go down. Now let's see if tariffs begin to go back up or not. And if they do, how do policymakers truly react to it? Are they going to be as sanguine about higher tariffs as they've said or not?